Open the bag." The words cut through the luxury hotel lobby like a knife. Every guest at the marble front desk turned toward the quiet janitor standing beside the brass elevator doors. His gray uniform was damp at the collar from the rain outside. His mop bucket sat beside him. One hand held a trash liner. The other held a small canvas lunch bag, worn at the corners, patched with black thread. Across from him stood Marissa Vale, owner of the Vale Meridian Hotel, a woman whose name appeared on magazines, charity boards, and gold plaques in rooms she rarely entered. Her white blazer looked untouched by the storm. Her diamond bracelet flashed beneath the chandelier as she pointed at the bag.
"Open it, Mr. Reed," she said, "or security will."
The janitor did not move. His name was Samuel Reed, 51 years old, quiet, polite, the kind of man guests forgot 5 seconds after asking where the restroom was. He had worked nights at the Vale Meridian for 6 years, polishing floors wealthy people crossed without looking down. But now 100 people were looking. A bride in a champagne dress stopped near the grand staircase. A group of investors froze beside the bar. 2 bellmen stood with their mouths half open. Behind Marissa, a young assistant clutched a tablet like it was a shield. And above them all, on the lobby's large security monitor, a paused video showed Samuel walking past the owner's private office less than 20 minutes earlier. Marissa's voice dropped colder. "My emerald necklace was in that office. Now it's gone. And the camera shows you outside my door." Samuel looked up at the monitor. Then he looked at the camera mounted above the hallway. Not scared, not angry, just focused. The kind of focus that made one security guard shift his weight. Marissa mistook the silence for guilt. "You think because you're invisible here, no one sees you?" she asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "People like you always think the rich are careless." Samuel slowly set the trash liner down. Then he said the first words he had spoken since she accused him. "That footage is fake." A murmur moved through the lobby. Marissa laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You clean floors, Mr. Reed. You don't authenticate security systems." Samuel's eyes stayed on the screen. "No," he said quietly. "But I know what a copied frame looks like." For the first time, Marissa Vale stopped smiling. And Samuel Reed, the janitor she had accused in front of every guest in her hotel, pointed not at the necklace, not at the office, but at the tiny timestamp in the corner of the video. "Pause it there," he said, "before you ruin the wrong man." If you've ever seen someone quiet get blamed because they looked easy to blame, stay with this story. Because sometimes the person standing in the corner is not weak. Sometimes he is simply tired of proving himself to people who already made up their minds. And sometimes one small detail on a security screen can bring down an entire lie. 3 hours before the lobby went silent, Samuel Reed had arrived through the employee entrance behind the Vale Meridian Hotel, carrying a thermos of coffee and a folded note in his pocket. The note was from his daughter, Lena. Not a child anymore, though Samuel still thought of her that way when she left reminders on the kitchen table. "Dad, don't forget the college payment deadline. I can call them if we need more time." He had read it twice before leaving their apartment that afternoon. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the pocket over his heart. Lena never complained. That was what hurt him most. She never asked why he worked nights and repaired neighbors' appliances on weekends. She never asked why he still drove the old truck with the cracked dashboard, or why he skipped dinner sometimes and said he had eaten at work. She knew. At 19, she knew too much. Samuel had raised her alone since his wife Grace died after a sudden stroke 8 years earlier. Before that, Samuel had been something else. A systems specialist for a private security contractor. The kind of man wealthy companies hired when they were afraid of being watched, hacked, copied, or betrayed. He had been good at it. Too good, some people said. Then one night, a mistake inside a corporate security investigation was blamed on him. Not officially, not in court, nothing clean enough to fight. Just enough whispers, enough doors closed, enough clients stopped calling, enough shame that Grace, already sick, watched him shrink into himself while pretending he was fine. After she died, Samuel stopped chasing the truth. He chose peace. He chose work that ended when the floor dried. The Vale Meridian hired him because he asked no questions and missed no shifts. Most people there knew him only as Sam from night maintenance. He fixed jammed service doors, replaced flickering bulbs, cleaned up broken glass after charity galas, helped elderly guests carry luggage when bellman disappeared. He moved like a man trying not to take up space, but Samuel noticed everything. He noticed which elevator camera lagged by half a second during storms. He noticed the executive office keypad clicked differently after someone replaced the cover plate. He noticed the night security supervisor, Brent Collier, had recently started wearing watches too expensive for his salary. He noticed Marissa Vale never looked directly at him, unless something had gone wrong. That evening, the hotel was hosting its largest private event of the season, a fundraising reception for the Vale Children's Arts Foundation. The lobby had been transformed into a glowing theater of wealth. White orchids climbed glass pillars. A string quartet played near the fountain. Waiters carried silver trays beneath chandeliers shaped like falling ice. And behind a velvet rope near the owner's private office, a necklace sat in a locked display case, the Vale Emerald. Marissa's late mother had worn it in a portrait that hung above the grand staircase. Tonight, Marissa planned to announce that the necklace would be auctioned at midnight to fund a new arts center. Cameras were there. Donors were there. Her board was there. Everything had to look perfect. That was why she saw Samuel as a problem the moment he crossed the lobby with a mop. He had been sent to clean a spill near the east hallway, just outside the private office. A waiter had dropped a glass of red wine, and the stains spread across the pale marble like blood in water. Samuel knelt and began working quietly. Guests stepped around him without apology. One man in a tuxedo almost kicked the bucket. "Careful, sir," Samuel said. The man glanced down, annoyed, then kept walking. From the office doorway, Marissa watched the exchange. Her assistant whispered something beside her, but Marissa's eyes stayed on Samuel's old shoes, his faded uniform, the frayed edge of his sleeve. "Why is he here right now?" she asked. "He's cleaning the spill," the assistant said. "During donor arrivals?" The assistant hesitated. "There was wine on the floor." Marissa exhaled through her nose, already irritated. Samuel heard her. He kept his eyes on the marble. That was another thing he had learned after years around rich people. If they forgot you were human, you heard more truth than they meant to give. A few feet away, Brent Collier, the hotel's night security supervisor, stood by the display case with one hand resting near his radio. He was tall, broad-shouldered, polished in a way that felt practiced. Guests liked him. Marissa trusted him. He always said the right thing at the right volume. Samuel did not trust him. Not because Brent was rude. Rude people were easy. Samuel distrusted him because Brent never looked surprised. Not when alarms glitched. Not when access logs vanished. Not when a camera went black for 6 seconds near the staff corridor 2 weeks earlier. Samuel had reported that outage. No one followed up. Now, as Samuel rinsed the mop, he heard the tiny click of the executive office door opening behind him. Not the regular click, the second click. The one that meant the keypad had accepted a master override. Samuel looked up. Brent was not at the display case anymore. He was near the office hallway, speaking into his radio with his back turned to the crowd. Samuel saw his left hand slip something small into his jacket pocket. Then the lights flickered. Only once. Half the lobby gasped, then laughed nervously as the chandelier glow returned. Marissa clapped softly to calm the room. "Just the storm," she said. But Samuel had already turned toward the ceiling camera. Storms did not make a single camera blink out of sequence. And the red recording light above the private office had just gone dark. For 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough for a careful man to move. Samuel stood slowly, mop in hand, eyes narrowed at the camera housing. Then he saw something on the floor near the velvet rope. A tiny black plastic shard. Not jewelry, not glass. A broken piece from a camera cover. He bent to pick it up. Before his fingers touched it, Brent's voice cut behind him. "Step away from that area, Sam." Samuel looked over his shoulder. Brent smiled, but his eyes were flat. "Owner's office is restricted tonight," Brent said. "You know that." Samuel glanced at the plastic shard again, then at Brent's jacket pocket.
then at the private office door, now closed. "I was sent to clean the spill," Samuel said. "And now you're done." Brent stepped closer, blocking him from the floor.
Samuel held the mop handle loosely. He could have argued. He could have asked why the camera light went out. He could have mentioned the master override click. But men like Brent did not make mistakes in front of witnesses unless they had already prepared someone else to take the fall. So Samuel only nodded.
"Yes, sir." He rolled the bucket away. But as he passed the brass elevator doors, he looked up at the lobby monitor mounted above the concierge desk.
The live feed from the hallway had returned.
Too clean, too smooth. The timestamp was running, but the shadows near the office door were wrong.
Samuel stopped walking for half a second. That was all.
Half a second. Enough for Marissa Vale to notice him looking. Enough for Brent Collier to notice Marissa noticing.
And enough for Samuel Reed to realize that whatever had just happened inside that office was not over. It was just being arranged. Samuel pushed the mop bucket through the service door and into the narrow back corridor where the hotel changed faces. Out front, everything smelled like orchids, perfume, polished wood, and money. Back here, the air smelled like bleach, wet coats, coffee, and hot machinery. 2 dishwashers hurried past him with empty glass racks. A young housekeeper named Nora leaned against the wall, rubbing her wrist where a laundry cart had clipped her. From the kitchen came the sharp rhythm of pans, orders, and nervous voices, trying not to sound nervous. Big events made everyone tense. Big events with Marissa Vale in the building made everyone careful.
"You okay, Mr. Reed?" Nora asked. Samuel stopped beside the utility closet. "Why? You looked like you saw something." He smiled faintly. "I see a lot of things." "That's what scares me." Nora meant it as a joke, but her voice carried worry.
She had only worked at the Vale Meridian for 4 months. Young, hard-working, 2 children at home, always saying thank you too many times. Samuel had once fixed the broken latch on her locker without telling anyone. Since then, she trusted him in that quiet way people trust a man who helps without making a speech. Samuel looked back toward the lobby door. Did anyone go into Miss Vale's office after the display case was set? Nora's smile faded. "I don't know. Security had everybody moving around. Mr. Collier told us not to use the East Hall." "When? Maybe 10 minutes ago?" "Right before the lights blinked." Samuel nodded slowly. That matched. Nora lowered her voice. "Is something wrong?" Samuel looked at the folded note in his pocket, feeling its edge through the fabric. College payment deadline. He should have gone home after his shift. He should have called the bursar's office. He should have asked for 1 more week, even though Lena hated when he sounded ashamed. Instead, he was standing in a hotel corridor, thinking like the man he had promised himself he was no longer. "Maybe nothing," he said. But nothing had a shape. A 2-second camera blackout. A master override click. Brent's jacket pocket. A broken camera cover shard on the marble. A hallway video that looked too smooth after a storm. Samuel opened the utility closet and hung the mop inside. On the second shelf sat his lunch bag. Brown canvas. Old. Lena had stitched the corner after the zipper tore. Inside was half a turkey sandwich, an apple, a small screwdriver set, and the folded photo he kept from Grace's last healthy summer. She had taken Lena to the lake. Samuel had been away on a job then, 3 states over, chasing a client's stolen data trail, while telling himself there would be more summers. There had not been. That was the first lesson life gave him. The second came 2 years later, when the company he worked for let a director blame him for a falsified security report. Samuel had found irregularities in a luxury properties surveillance archive. Before he could finish documenting them, the archive vanished, and his access badge was used to make it look like he had altered the files himself. He knew who had done it. He could not prove it. And without proof, truth became a story nobody rich wanted to hear. After that, Samuel stopped believing that being right was enough. He closed the lunch bag.
Then the service door opened hard. Brent Collier stepped in, followed by 2 uniformed security guards. "Sam," Brent said.
Miss Vale wants you in the lobby.
Samuel did not move.
For what?
Brent tilted his head, almost sympathetic.
Her necklace is missing.
The corridor went quiet.
Even the kitchen noise seemed to fall back. Nora's eyes widened. Samuel looked at Brent's hands. Empty now, relaxed.
When did it go missing?
Samuel asked. Brent's smile thinned.
That's not really your question to ask.
Samuel wiped his palms on a clean towel, not because they were dirty, but because he wanted one more second to think.
Did you check the display case logs?
Brent stepped closer.
Sam. The office keypad log. Sam. The camera archive before and after the blackout.
Brent's eyes hardened. One of the guards looked confused. Samuel saw it.
Good. Confusion meant Brent had not told him everything. Brent reached toward the shelf and took Samuel's lunch bag.
Nora stepped forward.
Hey, that's his.
Brent ignored her. Samuel's voice stayed low.
You don't need to touch that.
That's interesting, Brent said, because you were seen near the private office.
And now the owner's property is gone.
Samuel looked at the bag in Brent's hand. The trap was simple. Too simple.
That was what worried him.
A smarter thief would not hide a necklace in the accused man's lunch bag unless he wanted the accusation to happen fast, publicly, and emotionally. Not in a report. Not in a quiet office. In the lobby, in front of donors, cameras, and guests.
That meant the necklace was not the point. The fall was. Marissa Vale was already angry when Samuel was brought back into the lobby. Her face had changed. Earlier, she had looked irritated by imperfection. Now she looked personally betrayed by it. Around her, guests whispered behind hands. The charity board members gathered near the staircase. The paused hallway footage glowed on the security monitor behind the front desk. Samuel noticed the frame immediately. There he was on the screen, passing the office door, canvas lunch bag in his hand. Except he had not been carrying the lunch bag then. It had been on the utility closet shelf. Samuel felt his chest tighten. Not fear. Recognition. Whoever made the clip had taken a clean shot of him from another part of the hotel and layered it into the hallway angle. Good enough to fool guests. Good enough to fool an angry owner. Maybe even good enough to fool police on a busy night. But not good enough to fool the man who had once found copied frames for a living.
Marissa pointed at the screen.
That is you.
Samuel looked at her.
That is my image.
The lobby murmured again. Marissa blinked, insulted by the distinction.
Your image? Yes, ma'am. You expect me to believe someone created a fake video of a janitor? Samuel heard the cruelty in the word before she did. A janitor. Not a man. Not an employee. Not someone with a daughter, a dead wife, a history, a name. Just a role low enough to blame. He watched her expression, and for a moment he saw something beyond arrogance. Pressure. Fear. A woman standing inside an empire built by her family, terrified that one public failure would prove she had never deserved it. Marissa Vale was not stupid. That made her more dangerous. Smart people made bad judgments with confidence.
You had access, she said. You were in the hallway. You refused to leave when security instructed you.
I left when he told me to. Brent folded his arms.
Marissa turned to him.
And you personally saw Mr. Reed near the office?
I did, Brent said. He was bending near the restricted rope. Samuel looked at him. Because there was a broken piece of camera cover on the floor. Brent gave a short laugh. A camera cover? Yes. Convenient. Samuel turned toward Marissa. Ask him where it went. Brent's face did not change, but his jaw tightened by a fraction. Samuel saw it. So did Nora, standing near the service entrance with both hands pressed together. Marissa did not. She stepped closer to Samuel, voice rising just enough for the room to hear.
Mr. Reed, tonight this hotel is filled with donors, trustees, journalists, and families who came here to support children who need opportunity.
And instead of dignity, you brought shame into my lobby.
Samuel absorbed the words without lowering his eyes. Dignity. People with marble under their feet loved that word. They used it like a curtain.
Marissa held out her hand toward Brent.
The bag.
Brent gave it to her. Samuel's gaze moved from the bag to the monitor.
Timestamp read 8:42:16. The chandelier reflection in the hallway marble showed the lobby lights at full brightness. But at 8:42:16, the lights had flickered. Samuel remembered because the quartet had missed a note. The video forgot the storm. That was the first mistake. Then he saw the second. In the upper right corner of the screen, the security camera label read East Hall 03. But the Vale Meridian's East Hall camera had a dead pixel near the bottom left. Samuel had reported it 3 months ago. The hotel never replaced it. This footage had no dead pixel, not a live recording. A replacement. Marissa unzipped the lunch bag. Guests leaned forward. Samuel watched Brent instead. For the first time all night, the security supervisor stopped looking relaxed. Marissa reached inside and pulled out a green velvet box. The lobby gasped. Nora covered her mouth. Marissa opened the box. Inside, on cream silk, lay the Vale Emerald necklace. For one long second, the only sound in the room was rain tapping against the lobby windows.
Marissa's face hardened into certainty. Samuel closed his eyes once, not because he was defeated, because now he understood the full shape of the lie.
And when he opened them, he looked past the necklace, past the owner, past the shocked crowd, straight at the tiny timestamp glowing on the monitor.
Pause the video, he said.
Marissa's voice was ice.
Why?
Samuel pointed at the screen.
Because whoever made that forgot the lights went out.
Brent Collier moved before anyone else did. It's paused already, he said.
Samuel did not look at him.
Not there.
Marissa stood with the green velvet box in her hands, the emerald necklace burning under the chandelier light like a verdict.
Mr. Reed, she said, you are standing here with my mother's necklace found inside your bag, and you want to discuss lighting?
Yes. A few guests laughed nervously. One board member whispered,
Is he serious?
Samuel turned his head just enough to let the room hear him clearly. The lobby lights flickered at 8:42.
Marissa stared at him.
So?
So the east hallway camera would have caught the reflection change on the marble floor. That video shows steady light. He pointed to the screen. Look at the floor beside the office door.
Everyone turned. Most saw nothing. Samuel expected that. People saw what they were told to see. A janitor near a door. A missing necklace, a bag, a box. A simple story. But simple stories were easy to plant. Marissa's assistant, Claire, stepped closer to the monitor. She was young, sharp-eyed, and pale with stress. Her tablet trembled slightly in one hand.
I don't see a flicker, she said.
Because it isn't the original footage, Samuel said. Brent gave a low chuckle. That's a big accusation from a man caught red-handed.
Samuel finally turned to him.
No, it's a small observation.
Brent's smile faded.
Samuel pointed again.
And there's no dead pixel.
A silence followed that was different from the others. Not shocked, confused.
Claire looked back at him.
What dead pixel?
East Hall Camera 3 has a black pixel near the lower left corner. Been there since April. I wrote it in 2 maintenance reports. Claire looked down at her tablet and began tapping.
Marissa snapped.
Claire?
The assistant froze. Brent stepped forward. We don't need to entertain this. Samuel's voice stayed calm. You don't need to, but the police will.
The word police changed the air. Marissa's anger tightened into control. Her family had built the Vale Meridian on reputation.
A public theft was bad. A public false accusation was worse.
A security scandal during a charity event with journalists in the room was the kind of thing that could live forever online. She looked at Claire. Check the maintenance reports.
Brent's head turned slightly.
Miss Vale, with respect, I said check. Claire tapped faster.
Samuel watched Brent's right hand drift toward his radio.
Not to call for help. To warn someone. Samuel saw the tiny motion and spoke before Brent could press the button.
Also ask why the master override was used on your private office at 8:39. This time, Marissa looked at Brent.
Brent's face remained still, but the skin beneath his eyes tightened. That's impossible, he said. Only executive security has that clearance. Samuel nodded. Exactly. Marissa's fingers closed around the velvet box. Claire? Claire swallowed. I can check the access log. Do it.
Brent's voice sharpened. This is not appropriate in the lobby.
Samuel answered without raising his tone. You made it appropriate when you brought my bag here.
The crowd stirred. For the first time, a few people looked at Samuel differently. Not as guilty, not as safe to blame. As someone who was standing inside the accusation and still seeing more than everyone outside it.
Claire's tablet chimed softly. She looked at the screen, then at Samuel, then at Marissa. There are 2 maintenance reports about East Hall Camera 3, she said.
Both mention a dead pixel.
Marissa said nothing. Samuel continued. The live monitor doesn't show it because that clip wasn't pulled from camera 3. It was rebuilt from another angle. Brent laughed again, but now it sounded forced. Rebuilt?
This is absurd.
Samuel looked at the monitor.
Zoom in on my hand. Claire hesitated. Marissa nodded once. Claire connected her tablet to the lobby screen and enlarged the frame.
Samuel's image blurred, then sharpened.
His figure stood outside the office door, supposedly holding the canvas bag. Samuel lifted his own hands for the room to see. My left ring finger bends crooked from an old brick. He held it up. The finger leaned inward slightly, stiff near the knuckle.
On that video, it's straight.
Claire zoomed closer. Guests leaned in. The image on the screen showed the fake Samuel holding the bag with a perfectly straight left hand.
Someone near the bar whispered,
Oh my God. Brent's expression changed for less than a second, but Samuel saw it. Marissa saw it too.
Not enough to believe Samuel completely. Enough to doubt Brent. And doubt was all truth needed to breathe. Brent stepped towards Samuel. You're done talking.
The 2 guards moved with him, uncertain but obedient. Samuel did not step back. Nora's voice came from near the service entrance. Mr. Reed's lunch bag was in the utility closet. Everyone turned.
Nora looked terrified,
but she did not stop. I saw it there. After he came back from the lobby, it was on the shelf.
Brent pointed at her.
You don't want to get involved.
Samuel's eyes hardened. Don't threaten her.
The words were not loud, but they landed.
For the first time all night, the quiet janitor sounded like someone who had once given orders people obeyed.
Brent noticed.
Marissa noticed. Nora's eyes filled, but she stood her ground. I saw Mr. Collier take the bag, she said. He came into the corridor with security.
He picked it up.
Brent shook his head.
To bring it to the owner.
Samuel said, Before or after you put the necklace inside. The room erupted.
Marissa raised her voice.
Enough! The lobby fell silent again. She looked at Samuel, then at Brent, then at the necklace in her hand. Her certainty was cracking, and she hated that everyone could see it. Claire, she said, pull the raw archive. Claire's face tightened. I need admin access.
Marissa turned to Brent.
Give it to her. Brent did not move. I can't do that in the middle of an active theft investigation. Marissa's eyes narrowed. It is my hotel, and I am responsible for its security. Samuel looked at the ceiling camera above the hallway. He won't give access because the original file is gone. Brent snapped. You don't know that?
No, Samuel said. But I know how people erase evidence. They don't destroy everything. They replace just enough for a busy room to stop asking questions.
He turned to Marissa. Your real footage is probably still on the local buffer. Camera housings cache short fragments before upload. But you have to pull it now, before the system overwrites it.
Claire looked startled.
Our hallway cameras have local cache.
Samuel nodded. Older model, cheap upgrade package, installed badly. Marissa's face flushed at the insult, but she said nothing.
How long before it overwrites? Claire asked.
Maybe 20 minutes. Less if someone triggers a forced sync. Brent's hand moved again toward his radio. Samuel stepped forward. Don't.
The two men stared at each other across the marble floor. Rain hit the tall windows harder now. Outside, headlights slid past like pale ghosts. Inside, the charity guests had stopped pretending this was entertainment. Phones were raised. Board members whispered urgently. A journalist near the staircase was already typing. Marissa looked at the crowd and understood, perhaps for the first time that night, that control was no longer something she could command. She had to choose. Protect the man she trusted because he wore a suit? Or listen to the man she had humiliated because he wore a janitor's uniform? Samuel saw the battle in her face, so did Brent. And Brent acted first. He pulled the radio to his mouth. Lock down server access now. Samuel moved at once, not toward Brent, toward the concierge desk. Claire, the service terminal under the desk, he said. Open it. Claire stared. Marissa shouted, Do it! Claire ducked behind the desk and pulled open the lower cabinet. A small security terminal glowed blue inside, half hidden behind coiled cables and an old router. Samuel crossed the lobby quickly. One guard reached for his arm. Marissa snapped, Let him through! The guard stopped. Samuel knelt at the terminal. The keyboard was dusty. The screen showed a login page. Above it, the system clock ticked forward. 8:58:41. 8:58:42. Samuel's jaw tightened. He had minutes. Brent was walking toward him now, no longer smiling. You touch that system, Brent said, and you'll add cyber intrusion to theft.
Samuel did not look up.
I was blamed for that once. His fingers hovered over the keys. Not twice. The terminal beeped. A red warning flashed. Remote sync initiated. Claire whispered, Someone is wiping it. Samuel's eyes lifted to the screen, then to the lobby monitor, then to the camera above the east hallway. He entered one command, then another. The screen flickered. A progress bar appeared. Local cache recovery, 12%. Brent lunged toward the desk. Samuel stood just enough to block him. The guests gasped. Marissa stepped between them, her voice shaking with fury.
Mr. Collier, if you take one more step, you are fired.
Brent froze. The progress bar crawled. 31%, 47%, 68%. Then the screen went black. For one heartbeat, nobody breathed. Then the lobby monitor changed. The fake hallway footage vanished, and the real video began to play. The first image on the lobby monitor was not Samuel. It was the empty east hallway at 8:39. The timestamp glowed in the corner. The marble floor reflected the chandelier light. The velvet rope stood undisturbed. The door to Marissa Vale's private office was closed. Then Brent Collier entered the frame. No one spoke. Brent moved differently on the real footage, not like a supervisor checking a hallway, like a man counting seconds. He looked once toward the lobby. Then he removed a thin black device from his pocket and pressed it against the keypad. The office door opened. A sharp sound passed through the crowd, half gasp, half accusation. Marissa's face drained of color. On the monitor, Brent slipped inside the office. 6 seconds later, the hallway lights flickered. The camera image shook, blurred, then stabilized. Samuel leaned closer to the terminal. Keep watching, he said. The recovered file skipped for 1 second, damaged by the forced sync. Then the image returned. Brent came out of the office holding the green velvet box. In his other hand was the tiny, broken camera cover piece Samuel had seen on the floor. Brent paused near the velvet rope, looked down, then deliberately kicked the plastic shard beneath the base of a display stand. Nora whispered,
"That's what Mr. Reed saw."
The video continued. Brent walked out of frame. A minute later, the fake Samuel appeared on the replacement footage that had been shown to the lobby. But on the recovered footage, there was no Samuel, only an empty hallway. 100 people saw it at once. The janitor had never passed the office with his lunch bag. He had never carried the necklace. He had never stolen anything. Marissa turned slowly toward Brent.
"What did you do?"
Brent's polished face finally cracked. He looked at the guests, then at the guards, then at Samuel, who was standing beside the terminal with his crooked left ring finger resting lightly on the desk.
"You don't understand,"
Brent said.
Marissa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then explain it."
Brent laughed once, bitter and trapped. "You were going to sell it tonight."
"That was the point of the auction."
"No," Brent snapped. "You were going to sell a replica."
The lobby froze.
Marissa stared at him.
"What?"
Samuel looked at the velvet box in her hands. He had noticed the necklace earlier, but not closely. Now, under the chandelier, the emerald seemed too clean, too bright. No tiny abrasion near the lower clasp. No faint yellowing in the old setting, where age should have lived. Brent's eyes moved from face to face, desperate now.
"The original was gone before tonight," he said. "Ask her."
All eyes shifted to Marissa. For a moment, she looked as if he had struck her. Then Claire, still behind the desk, said quietly,
"Ms. Veal?"
Marissa's lips parted, but nothing came out. Samuel watched her. He had seen guilt before. He had seen fear. He had seen powerful people become small when truth entered the room without permission. But what he saw on Marissa's face was not the guilt of a thief. It was the horror of someone realizing a private mistake had become a public weapon. She closed the velvet box slowly.
"The original was removed from display last month,"
she said. The board members began whispering at once. Marissa lifted her voice, forcing herself to continue. "My mother's necklace was damaged during a private appraisal. The clasp was cracked. I approved a temporary replica for display until the auction. The buyers were to be informed before bidding." Brent smiled like he had found a rope. Except they weren't informed yet. Marissa looked at him with cold disgust.
"Because the auction was not until midnight."
Samuel understood then. The theft was fake in more than one way. The necklace in the box was not the priceless original. Brent had stolen a replica, planted it in Samuel's bag, and used the scandal to trap Marissa too. If Samuel went down as the thief, Brent could later leak that the stolen necklace was fake. Marissa would look like she had deceived donors. Her hotel, her foundation, her family name, everything would fall into suspicion. Samuel turned to Brent. "You weren't stealing jewelry." Brent's eyes cut to him. "You were selling leverage." The words landed harder than any shout. Claire tapped through the recovered cash.
"There's another file,"
she said. She put it on the monitor. This one had no hallway view. It was a partial audio-video fragment from the office camera before it went dark. The angle was crooked, catching only the edge of Marissa's desk and Brent's reflection in the glass cabinet. Another man's voice came through the speakers. "The owner takes the blame, the janitor takes the cuffs, and the board votes her out before morning." A woman in the crowd covered her mouth. Brent lunged for the terminal. The guards caught him this time. Not uncertainly. Firmly. The radio fell from his hand and skidded across the marble floor. Marissa stood motionless, the box held against her chest. Cameras were still raised. Guests still watched. But her attention had narrowed to Samuel Reed, the man she had called invisible, the man she had accused, the man who had saved her from a lie he had every reason to let destroy her. Police arrived 12 minutes later. By then, Samuel had already guided Claire through saving the recovered files to 3 separate drives. He wrote down the exact timestamps, the camera label discrepancy, the missing dead pixel, the forced sync warning, and the master override entry. He did it all on hotel stationery with a borrowed pen, his handwriting steady while officers took statements around him. Brent said nothing when they let him out. The guests parted as he passed. No applause, no dramatic speech, just the heavy silence that follows a person being seen clearly for the first time. Marissa approached Samuel near the concierge desk. For once, nobody stood between them. His lunch bag sat on the counter, open, with the turkey sandwich still wrapped inside. Beside it lay the photograph of Grace and Lena at the lake. The photo must have slipped out when Brent searched the bag. Marissa looked at it, then at Samuel.
"I was wrong,"
she said. Samuel waited. Her voice trembled, but she did not hide from the room.
"I accused you publicly. I humiliated you in your own workplace. I let your uniform decide your value before your words could. There is no excuse for that."
Samuel's face softened, but only a little.
"No, ma'am,"
he said.
"There isn't."
The honesty hit her harder than anger would have. Marissa nodded.
"You're right."
Around them, the hotel lobby was still bright, still expensive, still full of people who had watched a poor man carry himself with more dignity than everyone who had judged him.
"I'll make a full statement,"
Marissa said.
"Tonight. Your name will be cleared before anyone leaves this building."
Samuel picked up the photo and slid it back into his bag.
"That matters. And your job, I'm not sure I want it back."
Marissa looked down. For the first time all night, the owner of the Vale Meridian had no command ready.
Samuel zipped the bag.
"My daughter has a college payment due,"
he said.
"That's why I came in early. That's why I didn't walk out when I should have."
Marissa swallowed.
"I can cover it."
Samuel's eyes lifted to hers.
"No."
She stopped. He was not angry. That made it harder.
"I don't need charity because you feel guilty," he said. "But if you want to do something useful, hire people who know what they're doing before something breaks.
And listen to them before you need them to save you."
Marissa held his gaze. Then she nodded.
The next morning, the Vale Meridian released the full footage, the access logs, and a public apology naming Samuel Reed as the man whose knowledge prevented a criminal cover-up. Brent Collier was charged with theft, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. 2 board members connected to the scheme resigned before noon. Marissa postponed the auction. When it returned 3 months later, the foundation opened with a new scholarship program for children of hotel workers, housekeepers, janitors, kitchen staff, and security guards who did their jobs without anyone putting their names on plaques. Samuel did not ask for the first scholarship. Marissa gave it another name:
the Grace Reed Opportunity Fund.
Lena cried when she saw the letter.
Samuel pretended not to, but his hands shook as he held it.
He never became loud after that night. He did not start wearing suits. He did not tell guests who he used to be. He still carried his coffee in the same dented thermos. He still fixed small things when no one was watching. But people at the Vale Meridian learned to look twice. Not because Samuel demanded respect, because he had shown them what quiet strength looked like when the room was loud with lies. And sometimes, when new employees asked why the dead pixel on East Hall Camera 3 had never been repaired, Nora would smile and say, "Because that little black dot once told the truth when everybody else forgot how." Samuel would hear it from across the corridor. He would say nothing. He would simply keep walking, lunch bag in hand, head high, as if dignity had never needed a chandelier to shine.